Let's bring in Ilya Shapiro. He's the director of the Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. All right, we're going to dig into things. Ilya, between the establishment of the rules and the first day of arguments from the House managers, is the trial so far moving along as the founding fathers would have intended?
Well, it's hard to know how they would see an impeachment trial. I guess the founding generation. It's hard to remember if they actually had one for judges. Of course, the first presidential one wasn't until Andrew Johnson. Each impeachment trial is different for all sorts of reasons. The problem in these polarized times is it seems like, as Ben was saying, unless there's some really freakish revelation, everything is baked in already, and the whole thing seems like kabuki theater from the start of the House proceedings and now continuing into this Senate trial.
So we know there's a battle over whether to admit new witnesses in the Senate trial, but from a constitutional perspective, should House Democrats have consulted the judiciary branch and gone to the courts to get this key testimony before drafting the articles of impeachment? It would have taken a longer period of time, but is that something that they should have considered, or perhaps they did consider it and they considered it was not going to work for them, but should they have done that?
Well, I'm not sure what the Democrats' strategy is, because if indeed they think there's a lot more to get and it would be useful to have Don McGahn's testimony, other evidence and witnesses and what have you, then they should have drilled down and waited for that legal process to work out and get those rulings and get that evidence in. If, on the other hand, they think it's so urgent as a matter of national security that they couldn't wait, well, that seems to be how they were proceeding, except then Speaker Pelosi delayed transmitting the articles for several weeks. So it's kind of conflicting messages, whether this is just for the base or inflicting political damage to the president. It seems like public opinion isn't moving one way or another since this process started, and nobody outside the Beltway is really paying attention. Hopefully your ratings don't necessarily reflect that, but it depends really, again, what their goal is, and we could see the end of this process and an acquittal and Trump getting reelected and the Democrats again impeaching him in the next term. Funnier things have happened in our current political age.
You're right. And to the point that you make, Ilya, the Democrats saying that this was a national security issue, but then you point out the delay from Speaker Pelosi to the Senate. On the other hand, it's also sort of curious to me that given that the Constitution just signifies high crimes and misdemeanors, you could potentially, I think what we've seen in the polling is that Americans want to see a fair trial, and yet Republicans seem to be saying that the president says everything that he's done so far is perfect, including that phone call with Volodymyr Zelensky. Why not come out and say, look, this wasn't the right thing to do, but it's not impeachable? In other words, admonish the president, but don't remove him from office. That would seem to be a better strategy than saying, yes, everything that the president has done up until this point, there's nothing wrong here. There's nothing to see here.
I think that does make sense, Vlad, and indeed, National Review just had an editorial saying you can impeach for something that's not a crime. That's absolutely correct. Fundamentally, loss of the public's trust is what impeachment boils down to. You don't have to violate some part of the criminal code, and indeed, some minor violation of the criminal code isn't impeachable either. So not all crimes are impeachable as well. Maybe, it depends who you talk to on what day. I don't know if too many Republicans are agreeing in explicit terms that the call was perfect. I'm not sure if any of them would necessarily have acted the same way, but certainly saying that this is politically motivated, or even if the president wasn't completely correct, this isn't impeachable. That, to me, seems like a better tack, but who knows? The way that their bases are lining up, maybe it just doesn't matter one way or another.
Yeah, Ilya, I think that's a huge part of it, is that we know the president has sort of broadcast the message that he wants sent across, and it's that it was a perfect phone call, and he's sort of told them,
right, that's
this
a good point.
Is the line.
This is the line.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But I want to ask you about this whole thing that was floated about testimony for testimony, the Bidens for John Bolton, and the Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that's completely off the table. And as I was sort of thinking about it, of course, we all go back to our days of watching marathon sessions of Law and Order. One of the things that I remember is you should always know what a witness is going to say before you question them. And it occurred to me that we really don't know what John Bolton would say. But what do you think of this idea of, sort of scrapping the whole concept of testimony for testimony, at least at this point?
Well, I think it's a moot point. As you said, it was floated and quickly shot down. And this goes back to the last question you asked me. I'm not sure what there is new for us to learn about the phone call, about the delay of the aid, whatever all of these factual issues are being debated. What possibly could we learn? At this point, it really is a judgment call about whether what the president did, whether it was an abuse of power, whether it was impinging on national security, whether it went beyond executive power, the Impeachment Act, all of these kind of technicalities. I don't know if any more color from John Bolton or anyone else is really going to change the legal basis for these particular articles of impeachment. So, in effect, this is why the Senate isn't exactly a jury. Typically, a criminal jury is deciding the facts. Is this person guilty? Can we believe this witness? But it's more, do these facts that we know, again, unless there's something really crazy in the background that hasn't come out yet, do they add up to something that's a legal violation or an impeachable offense?
And so you sort of believe that the information that we have thus far that came from the House investigation that led to them choosing these two articles of impeachment, it ought to be enough.
I don't know. If the Democrats seem to have thought that it was enough, and that's why they proceeded with voting on the articles rather than trying to find out more information or waiting for the subpoenas, having an emergency motion to get all those subpoenas and witnesses potentially into the evidentiary record. So it's, and Adam Schiff is not going on TV saying, there's so much more to this, we're just not allowed to disclose, or, the judge is prohibiting me from doing this. So it's not like the Democrats are saving something in reserve and they're now complaining that John Roberts or other courts or whomever is not letting them use it. It's part fishing expedition, part political exercise. But I think at this point, I don't know what new facts there really could be. And it's just a matter of judgment. And, my judgment, I suppose, is as good as yours, except it's the senator's judgment that really matters. Whether this call, whether that was an abuse of power, whether the abuse of power, if it was that, it rises to the level of an impeachable offense.
All right, Ilya, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ilya.
My pleasure.